We are back, week 4 of the PFF NFL show betting preview. Judah, how are you going, man?
It's good. Another glorious week of football. I really feel like I had the full range of kind of betting outcomes and betting sweats. I think this was, and we were just talking off air. I definitely came around your side on Buffalo, so thankfully I ended up having most of my exposure there. But I had a lot of game angles that I think I projected very well, and the bets were just like 4 yards off here, 3 yards off there, and it was just extremely tilting. But thankfully, Jaden Daniels at the very last, offensive snap of the game came through for me. I forgot all about the just sweats of Sunday and a really painful Josh Allen not getting enough passing yards from the earlier game. It was all forgotten there. So ended off on a great note. Going to try and channel that to this week. How was your betting week?
It was good. I was at that Washington-Cincy game. The PFF office is here in Cincinnati, so I went, and defense was optional in that game. We'll just put it that way. But my week was a little up and down. Some of the guys I liked heavy on props, Bowers, McBride, didn't get there. I still not sure how Bowers didn't get there in that game script. But Andy Dalton came through with a nice SGP. Andy Dalton, Deontay Johnson, Panthers all spread that made it a good week overall. So hopefully we can keep that rolling into week 4 here with Washington and Carolina saving us in week 3 of all teams.
As someone once said, how could you not be romantic about football?
There we go. And this Thursday night game, that's a good place to start. This feels like it feels like a game we've seen on Sunday night multiple times. It's like 30-point blowouts with Giants Cowboys, but Dallas is coming in a little bit rough, right? Especially the run defense being the glaring issue that everyone wants to talk about coming into this matchup. They're still 5.5-point favorites here against the Giants, 45.5-point total. Do you think the Giants can punish them on the ground like we've seen the last 2 weeks with the Saints, with the Ravens?
Yeah, I mean, Devin Singletary, I think, has the most missed tackles forced of any running back. I believe that's true. If not, he's right up there at the very top of the league. I mean, right now the Dallas run D they cannot stop a nosebleed, as you said. I don't see any reason why the Giants, who've had plenty of success on the ground, and it certainly helps that Daniel Jones seems a little bit more mobile after his injuries last season, and that's obviously just going to elevate the run game. This is a bunch of cool research that was done a few years ago about like the gravity that a Russian quarterback has on linebackers, where they kind of have to slow down a little bit when you're doing any sort of read option, or even just in general when they hand off by virtue of the threat that a running quarterback has. So the Giants do have that advantage, and I kind of see no reason why this week would be any different. But I feel like that this is like, there's so many different questions here, and you almost framed it perfectly of like, I think a lot of the current narrative and what's driving a lot of the current market pricing is like, okay, we pretty much know what the Cowboys are. They're like loosely the same team they've been for the last 5 years. And on the flip side, like, we kind of know what the Giants are. They're basically the same team of the last like 3-4 years. They're really bad. Like, what's going to be different here? And I think both of those are wrong. I definitely talked about this in the offseason of thinking that the Giants were going to be a lot closer to the 2022 version of the team than the 2023 version of the team. And I kind of highlighted 2 points there, which is like the Giants offensive line was historically bad. And that just like by virtue of regression and injuries, like that could not sustain itself. And they also added to the offensive line, and like they're competent right now. They're like a little bit below average, but not so far removed that like you can't have success. And Malik Neighbors has been like a revolutionary piece for them. And I think in many ways has like stepped in and basically just like carried the passing offense on his back. And even the things he's not doing on the stat sheet, which have obviously been great, the gravity that he kind of pulls the rest of the defense really opens things up. So My English for some reason right now is just, I just got off a red eye, have not slept. And you don't like to think that like your language and recall is going to go bad, but I guess this is how it goes. But yeah,
Malik Neighbors being good. We got that point across.
Exactly. Malik Neighbors good. Giants offensive line not as bad. And the last thing I'll say on this is that very interestingly, Brian Dable had run play action on 21% of his snaps in week 1 and week 2, ran motion about like 47 and 50%. In week 3, that went up to 75% on motion, and play action went up to like 28%. I think he's pressing a little bit more of those kind of easy buttons, so to speak, the things that just allow your offensive scheme to be more successful. I think that's notable, especially if the Giants offensive line, I mean, whatever Michael Parsons is going to do can kind of wreck that situation, but they like kind of mitigated Myles Garrett last week, not in the sense of mitigating his presence on the field, but like production wise, it was fine. Like they were very good against the Browns pressure, even when, I mean, that's like probably not sustainable, but was certainly true. And I think it's a very similar type of defense that maybe a little bit more vulnerable on the back end, and they don't have Denzel Ward in coverage. And this is a Dallas team that's allowing the 6th most separation. The Giants have some real pathways to success, I think, on both passing and running.
Yeah, and when they were having success in that 22 season, like you mentioned, a lot of it was just kind of getting Daniel Jones on the perimeter, the slide routes, just get him. You can either dump it off in the flat for yards after catch opportunities or take off as a scrambler. Right. So if they're incorporating more of that stuff back into the offense, I think it's a good thing. And to your point about Malik Neighbors, they're building the whole ship out of Malik Neighbors right now. He leads the NFL in targets. One of the angles in this game that I'm interested in beyond the run defense stuff for Dallas, which we'll get to in a little bit, but there's been pretty big man zone splits for the Giants passing offense through 3 weeks. It's not a huge sample, right? It's a 3-game sample. So it's tough to take too much, but they're 6.7 yards per dropback versus man, 4.4 versus zone, 5th in EPA per play versus man, 29th versus zone. And you kind of see Neighbors is getting a bigger chunk of his targets against man. He has a 50% target rate against man, which is ridiculous. It's 15 targets on 30 routes. And compared to 26 versus zone, which is not low by any means, but significantly lower. And at least my working theory there is it's when it's one-on-one coverage, Daniel Jones has trust in Neighbors, like clearly. That catch over Martin Emerson where he mossed him last week against the Browns, a couple situations where Neighbors isn't open, but Jones still trusts him, right? And then those other situations where Neighbors actually create separation. So it's just easier to be like, okay, all our targets are going to this guy. It's man coverage. We're going to get the ball to this guy, compared to zone where there's other factors. You're trying to hit windows, different things like that. So in terms of this matchup against Dallas, they're going from a heavy man coverage team under Dan Quinn to a team that's playing zone on 80% of their snaps, 3rd highest in the NFL through the first 3 weeks, only behind the Chargers and the Colts. So I think it's going to be a little bit tougher to get the ball to Neighbors. Not that he's not still going to get a lot of targets. And then in the run game, Dallas has been awful, right? There's no excuse for what they put on the television in week 2 and 3. The interior guys are getting blown back. They're our lowest graded interior D line in terms of run defense grade. You want Mozzie Smith to be that guy. That's who you drafted him to be a run stuffer, but he's struggling. Adigi Zua is struggling. Linval Joseph's 35 years old. He's just not the same player anymore. So it's an exploitable matchup, and I'm uncertain is the best way to put it, at least, that New York's going to be able to do the same things that we saw from New Orleans and from Baltimore, who by all indications this year are very good rushing offenses. The missed tackles forced thing for Singletary is kind of like is he forcing a lot of missed tackles because the blocking's not good? or are they really adding value? The offensive line's better. The bar was low. They're still a bottom 5 graded run blocking unit for us through the first 3 weeks of the season. So that's really the central central component to this side of the ball is whether New York's going to be able to bully Dallas up front, like we've seen the last couple of weeks. The read option stuff with Daniel Jones helps. It's not Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. It's certainly not that, but you can get some of those elements that we saw Dallas really struggle with last week, where Baltimore was spamming just read option stuff with Lamar and Henry. So if Dallas is able to be a little bit better there, I think this is potentially a bounce back spot for that defense with some of the angles that I talked about.
Yeah, and like not even mentioning the fact that like Michael Parsons is always a threat to take over a game, kind of like he did in Week 1, where he was in Cleveland's backfield basically every snap.
I know it's a different defense, right? It's a different coordinator, but I can't get Daniel Jones getting pressured 30 times a game against Dallas out of my head the last year or two. It's just stuck there. I maybe I should move off it, but I can't.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And like also, I mean, Andrew Thomas as an all-world tackle, that was just like Myles Garrett owned him. I mean, I think what the grades we had were like Andrew Thomas was like 91, 87 week 1 and 2, and like 18 or something week 3 against Myles Garrett. So it's like you can kind of see both sides there. Like,
but Myles Garrett only had one tackle, Judah. He didn't show up in the stat sheet, so he didn't have any.
There you go. But that's why we chart every player on every game. No, I think those are all really great points, and I think are stuff to monitor. The only thing I'd highlight is on the flip side of the ball. What we haven't really talked about the Cowboys offense going against the Giants defense. And I think the man zone stuff is particularly interesting for Neighbors. Actually, I'll just talk a little bit about that first. In my head, when I was talking about Neighbors initially, I wanted to say something along the lines of like, I think Neighbors is like kind of like Jamar Chase in his rookie season, completely revolutionizing the offense. But I didn't want the point to be me saying like, oh, I think the Giants have any sort of like potential like the Bengals offense did. But I think what you highlighted is perfect. Of like Jamar Chase does not show up incredibly well in like most like separation metrics. And a lot of his value comes from the fact that like when there is single coverage, as we saw against Washington, like, and it was just a check that like, okay, we got single coverage and Chase, like we are running a go route. He scores a 60-yard touchdown. They do it again. It's basically automatic that that's the route they're going to run. And I think we can see a very similar style for the Giants. Like even if there aren't so many snaps, if we get 3 to 4 snaps of Malik Neighbors in this single coverage, that could be all you need, because like that's the potential for like those chunk plays to occur. And then like if you get a bunch of those snaps, if you get like, meaning the difference is when you're projected 3 and like there are 6, that can be a huge difference in actually determining the outcome of the game. All that aside, I would say that the Giants played a ton of man last week. They played like 35% man, which I don't know if that was a particular matchup piece of it, if they're like kind of shifting and they're now dealing with some injuries on Adoree Jackson. Looks like he's going to be out for this game. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Dallas has some like really, really drastic man zone splits over the past bunch of years. And certainly if the Giants play man a lot, like they do not have anyone to cover CeeDee Lamb. I'm curious what they do there. We obviously want to coach our bets. I have no sense of like how much man or zone they're going to play. And like it, for all we know, it's just some aberration, but that's certainly something I'm going to be monitoring. And I do think will matter a lot in determining the outcome of the game.
Yeah. My biggest concern with Dallas is through the first couple of weeks, I'm like, okay, they're going to figure it out. They look good against the Browns in week 1, but now we're sitting here after 3 weeks. And I just think they've gotten worse around the edges on this offense. And it hasn't changed fundamentally. You're still putting the ball in Dak's hands. And basically it's similar to the Cincy offense where you're not doing a ton to push those easy buttons. You're like, okay, Dak, just make the right reads, make an accurate throw. And that hasn't happened at the same rate as we saw last season. Their run game is worse. You don't have Tony Pollard. You have a couple new offensive linemen. They're bottom 3 in both explosive run rate and rushing success rate. So you're not getting any consistency. You're not getting any big plays. So it's all on Dak right now. And they're a vertical passing offense. So we chart some passing concepts. 30% of their plays are charted with a vertical passing concept, which is essentially just 2 deep routes, all go, scissors, over plus corner, whatever it is. That's the highest rate in the NFL. And Dak hasn't been quite as accurate downfield, as that's usually a really good strength for him. The receivers also aren't getting as much separation. Right? You don't have a ton outside of CeeDee Lamb. Brandon Cooks isn't the same player at this stage of his career as he was a couple years ago. Jalen Tolbert right, is kind of an unproven guy there. Had a lot of deep success in college, hasn't really showed up in the NFL to this point. So drawing that connection to the Bengals. Again, they have a better run game than the Cowboys do, but with T. Higgins out the first couple of weeks, you saw the Chiefs just literally double Jamar Chase every play. Essentially, it was one of the wildest game plans. You don't see that in the NFL, but they were comfortable doing it because it's like, who else is going to beat us? And I think you might be seeing a little bit of that with Dallas too. Again, this is a New York defense that I'm not necessarily scared of, but I'm not as confident in the Cowboys offense as it was coming into the year.
Yeah, no, I would just echo that. I mean, like Jalen Tolbert is quite literally the worst separator by our metrics this season. And like, they don't have secondary weapons. Brandon Cooks is not seeing the field as much, which I think is interesting, at least relative to last season. And they just they don't have the secondary weapons to kind of bet, to win outside if CeeDee Lamb's not going to explode.
So what are you on for this game?
Yeah, so I think kind of like to recap a lot of the different angles we took here. I think that the pathway to success for the Giants is going to be I think they're going to have success running one way or another. And the first one I like is I think the Giants did pass a bunch relative to expectation last week, but I still think they're going to be neutral. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have some rushing success. I like Devin Singletary on rushing alts, and I can see a game script where just Dallas returns and like the Giants play a bunch of man. Dallas kind of as their passing success that we've been accustomed to. They caused some problems in the pass rush for the Giants and win a game that way. And you can get this nice inverse correlation of Devin Singletary rush yards and Dallas winning. But I also see a scenario in which the Giants have some success passing against Dallas as well, where especially if they're going to hit neighbors on a couple of these deep shots, and if they kind of lean more into this pass heavy script, I think just fundamentally this game is mispriced relative to where these teams are at, and kind of hitting it in both ways of I think if the Giants win, it's a function of Daniel Jones playing well above expectation. And I think that relative to what the market's pricing, and if they're kind of right and I'm a little bit more wrong here, I think kind of getting that inverse correlation with Singletary and Dallas is also still appealing.
Yeah, I'm on the way I think it is most likely to play out is Dallas wins comfortably, but their offense still doesn't look super convincing. I'm pretty low on the Giants offense in general. Right. So I like the under 45.5. I also like Dallas -5.5. And the player angle I like is Daniel Jones rushing overs. You get some of the designed run stuff, right? If the run game is having some success, Jones can be part of that. But you also get a situation where if the Giants if Singletary is not running the ball well, and the Giants are behind, the Dallas pass rush comes back to life a little bit, and you get some scramble opportunities. So that's what I'm on for this game. Yeah. Moving on, we got a Sunday afternoon game here. Eagles versus Buccaneers, a matchup we've seen 4 times in the past 3 years, despite not being a divisional game. Twice in the playoffs, twice in the regular season. Philly is 2.5-point favorites, coming off a come from behind, a surprising win against the Saints, where they shut down this high-flying Saints offense. 44.5-point total. Tampa's coming off a pretty ugly loss to Denver, where Bo Nix was able to pick apart their defense, which generally not a good sign based on what we saw the first 2 weeks. But Philly has a lot of injuries. So how are you looking at this one jumping in?
Yeah, I think the name of the game here has got to be the injuries. And at some point, I mean, Devonta Smith he's not practicing Wednesday. He's in the concussion protocol. That can't be a good sign. AJ Brown, I mean, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, so it's possible things change, of course. But AJ Brown missing a couple weeks with a hamstring, not getting any work in. I think that puts him on the wrong side of questionable here. And at a certain point, Jahan Dotson is allergic to targets. He's run one of the highest. He's run 100-something routes and has gotten 5 targets, and they've both been kind of quick screens. I mean, Britton Covey, don't even know how to pronounce his last name, is not exactly instilling fear into defenses, I think. And when you can game plan to just like, okay, we're going to make sure to have like someone on Goddard and maybe like shade some safety help that way and like try and eliminate the crossers, you kind of need like Jalen Hurts to play a little bit of hero ball and use his legs and then to really rely on Barkley and the ground game. And I think that's not the offense that Philadelphia wants to run. And especially when you kind of think of where the market's at, like they're kind of pricing in an Eagles team that's a little bit more healthy than I think they are. I'll stop there on the offensive side. Do you see the injuries differently? You kind of see it the same way.
No, I see it the same way. This is one of the lines I was surprised when I opened up the betting app and saw it. Philly with these injuries on offense are not the same team, and I've got bad news for you, buddy. Britton Covey's not even available. Britton Covey's on IR.
Oh, I didn't even know that. See, there you go.
So if AJ Brown stays sidelined with the hamstring, if Devontae Smith is out, you're rolling out Jahan Dotson, Paris Campbell, Johnny Wilson as your top three receivers. And this is a Philly offense that really relied on Brown and Smith winning one-on-ones on the outside. Right? They kind of ate against single high when they got those looks, and they rely on those guys to make plays. And with this receiving core, I don't see it happening. And it's not even just that. It's the offensive line. Mekhi Becton left the week 3 game with a finger injury. Lane Johnson left with a concussion. Like, who knows if those guys are going to be available. So they're really shorthanded. And yes, Tampa's coming off this bad loss last week against Denver, but they're a competent team. They're a competitive team. And with how shorthanded the Eagles are, I'm surprised they're underdogs, honestly.
Yeah. I don't think they'll close as underdogs, especially if we get that information. And like Lane Johnson injury matters a lot. I think also when you think about like Jalen Hurts' style of play, he basically does not get, when he is pressured, it's almost like never a function of the offensive line. And like Jalen Hurts holds the ball for a very long time. And that's fine. Like that type of pressure is not as bad as the types of pressure that we tend to kind of lump together of like plays being completely disrupted. Right, I talk about like this pressure disruption. That's like plays which kind of take the quarterback off his rhythm. Like they have one of the lowest rates in the league for like 3 years running. Jalen Hurts invites a ton of pressures, and that leads to some sacks, but also a lot of these big plays and scrambles. We don't really like know what Jalen Hurts is going to do if like he is forced in. Like Tampa doesn't have the best pass rush in the world, but like what happens if you have a massive hole at right tackle? I mean, Lane Johnson has been an absolute staple there for years. Like if Jalen Hurts is getting pressured in 2.5 seconds, especially against like the blitz where he's historically struggled, and Todd Bowles is certainly going to be dialing that up. Like we don't really know what type of quarterback Jalen Hurts is, not just from a production standpoint. Like we literally don't know what he's going to do. It's very predictable now of like, he's going to drop back. He's going to, if he doesn't have someone open, he's going to wait till about 3 seconds and he's going to dart and try and scramble. Right? Does that happen at 2.3 seconds now? If they're generating a lot of pressure, does that mean that Jalen Hurts is going to like try and scramble 15 times? Maybe. Does it also mean that like he kind of panics in the pocket when no one's open and isn't going through his normal progression? That's also true. I think he's a very kind of his traits are very well defined and very sticky. That when something kind of changes in that regard, I think it changes production in ways we might not be able to kind of predict or understand.
Yeah, and that's the part we've talked about it when we've talked about Philly some early in the season, but that's the part of the Hurts game that is most concerning is how he deals with pressure. When he's moved off his spot this season, he's 10 of 25 for 81 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. And you brought up Bowles. Bowles is going to send the house. We've seen it. It's happened 4 times. He has his base blitz rate since 2021 is 46%. That's the highest in the NFL. In the 4 games against Philly, it goes up to 57%. And they're 12% cover 0. I know it seems like a small number, but that's a big number. So especially if there's offensive line injuries, you don't have these elite receivers creating early separation. They're going to test him to extend plays. And really the only way I see Philly having success is leaning on Barkley. And Tampa is generally not a run defense that teams test or that you want to test. Early in the season, it hasn't been as good for them. Vita Vea is dealing with an MCL sprain. He missed week 3. Kalijah Cansey's been out on the interior. So if they really are this injured and these guys miss, which a lot of them are up in the air still, so maybe they don't. I could see Philly just leaning into the run game more, even if that's not something that they typically do.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think like if you're game planning, that's got to be how you approach it, at least considering the receiving options. But obviously, like we don't know what they're going to do. It's kind of dicey. I think the blitz is also an interesting way to view the other side of the ball here, which is that Philadelphia was blitzing. It was like 32% in week 1, 37% in week 2, 17% last week, but they generated a ton more pressure. Now, part of that has to do with like Jalen Carter was insane, and the Saints lost 2 of their interior guys last week to injury mid-game. But that's not going to get any better against Tampa Bay, who has like a really, really bad interior. And I think that like, especially where Philadelphia wants to be able to generate pressure on the interior, kind of lines up very well with the matchup advantage they have there. I'm curious if you think that kind of slows Baker Mayfield down, or even if like that was just like 1 week anomaly and like Jalen Carter is really good, but he's not going to be this good every week.
Yeah, no, he was superhuman in that game against the Saints. He had a 93.5 PFF grade. That's the highest single game grade we've given out to an interior defensive lineman all season. And he was clubbing Cesar Ruiz into oblivion in that game. He was standing up Trevor Penning in the run game. He was knifing into the backfield. He was everywhere. So that is a concern, right? Because the interior of the Tampa Bay offensive line through 3 weeks, 27th in pass pro grade out of 32 units. So that is where they're weaker. They should get Gedeke back. Maybe it sounds like a right tackle. So Gedeke Wirfs is a really strong duo, but Carter can wreck the game on the interior still, right? Because that's a weak point. I don't really know what to make of last week in terms of what Baker was doing. His time to throw was up around 3 seconds, and his average depth of target was 3.5 yards. So he was getting away a little bit in the first 2 weeks of the season with creating and making guys miss in the pocket. But that's a dangerous slope because that you don't want Baker doing that. Even if it's working, you don't want Baker doing that. And you kind of saw that come back to bite him against the Broncos where he took 7 sacks.
Yeah.
So I think this is another spot where I've bet on the starting running back against the Eagles and they're rushing over for 3 straight weeks. I'm especially excited this week because I think they're beyond just the matchup angle with Philly. I think there's like a narrative angle around Bucky Irving and him getting more playing time because he's clearly been better. After the loss last week, Bowles said of Bucky Irving, we were behind. We threw it a little bit more. Rashad's probably a better pass protector at this point, but Bucky has definitely earned more reps. And I mean, just looking at the raw counting numbers, Irving has 25 carries for 154 yards. White has 31 for 66. Like Bucky Irving is clearly the better runner. And this is a matchup against Philly where we think that Philly offense might struggle. We know that the Eagles pass rush could be a concern on the interior. Rashad White rushing overs. Bucky Irving rushing overs. I'm all in.
I was going to come with that also.
Yeah, so sorry to steal your thunder there.
No, that's all good. That's all good. I love that spot. I would just also one quick note on, you brought up Baker Mayfield's kind of like pressure to sack type of statistics of how well he's dealing with pressure. Last season, Baker Mayfield had a pressure to sack rate of like 18%, which was like 9 to 10% lower than his career average. And this season, he's back to where he was for the previous years of his career. I mean, even worse, it's at 37%. I don't think that's going to sustain itself. And that's like very much influenced by what was going on last week. But like, that is something to monitor. And like, it's kind of difficult, I think, to understand and quantify like what the difference between 18% and 25% in like a thing like pressure to sack. But you realize just how bad sacks are on average of like, you're losing almost a point in expectancy. And like those plays really add up, right? If you're running 40 dropbacks a game, like that's a field goal that you're losing in expectancy over time. And like that stuff matters a lot. And especially when you kind of think about the roles that sacks play in killing drives. And that's kind of like a spot where I'm a little bit hesitant. Like when I think about this from a very high level of just saying like the Eagles have no one to throw to. And then it's like, but they can also just like create a ton of disruption on the Tampa side. And like if Baker has like one of these bad sack games, like they're not just going to like produce automatically, so to speak. And things are a little bit, I'm trying to see the different pathways of which like, okay, how does Philly win this game? What is the scenario? And you're like, okay, like that can realistically happen. But
that's
go ahead.
That's the normal bell curve meme where it's like Eagles have no one to throw to and all the stuff in the middle. And then it's like Eagles have no one to throw to at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Just to recap where I'm at, it was probably pretty apparent, but I like Tampa Bay money line in this game. If you're getting it plus money, I also like Bucky Irving rushing over is probably staying away from everything else just because some of the uncertainty around the Tampa pass game. So,
yeah, I think that the way that the Tampa pass game has more success is if they can run the ball efficiently, right? Like Rachaad White setting up 3rd and 8s for Baker Mayfield to take sacks is the recipe for disaster, especially against Philadelphia. But I think conditional on Bucky Irving having more rushing success, and he's just been so much better, and this Philadelphia defense is, as you said, extremely vulnerable. Like I think that's a good SGP angle that I like.
Let's move over to Sunday night, a good one. Two teams who came into the year projected to be at the top of the AFC. I think that's probably still the case, even though Baltimore's gotten off to a slow start. Ravens versus Bills. Ravens are 2.5-point favorites, 46.5-point total. And I talked about it last week. I thought that was a really good matchup for Buffalo against Jacksonville. It turned out they were an absolute house. The game was over by the time the second Monday night game started. So for your take about wanting to watch every minute of both Monday night games, you got basically all you needed before Cincy Washington kicked off last week.
Hey, some of us do not take any football for granted, no matter what the score is, no matter anything else. I love football. I want to watch any and all games. Still inexcusable to not stagger those games at least a little bit more. But I mean, the Bills are a house. This is, I think that's kind of like, maybe it's another bell curve meme here of like, okay, the market knows what it's doing in Baltimore, or just like Bills are ass. And like Josh Allen right now is Patrick Mahomes is like the best. And I don't like these conversations about the best quarterback in football. It is undeniable that Josh Allen is like by far the MVP of the league through 3 weeks. He is so far and away better than everyone else right now. And it's not as if he's doing this against like complete cupcake teams. I mean, it doesn't even matter. He's producing so well. And I don't think that Baltimore is a particularly strong defense, at least relative to kind of what's implied. Right. We've talked about like how they have not been able to generate as much pressure without Mike McDonald there. And the like defensive personnel is not that great. I guess I'll just go through the whole thing here. On the flip side of the ball, like you talked about this last week, and this is something that I kind of dug into a little bit more, which is that I was saying that I thought that like Buffalo has done a like great job over the last bunch of years. Number one, developing cornerbacks, and number two, basically schematically trying to eliminate explosive plays. And I was saying that has kind of like a strength on strength with the Jags because the Jaguars should have more time to throw. Like I didn't see Von Miller coming back to just like being Von Miller of 10 years ago. And like they now can generate a ton of pressure, which is like an area that they've struggled with, at least generating like quick pressure, i.e. ones that are like generally because of the defensive line itself and not like, oh, the coverage is good and the quarterback held onto the ball for too long. I read like that's a distinction of like how pressure can arise. And Baltimore's not like the pass protection is not good. Lamar Jackson's done a great job scrambling, and that is the type of thing that can mitigate an advantage of just like your defense can only hold up for so long. And if Lamar Jackson is kind of running around in the pocket and finding open men, like that is how you can get explosive plays on like 6-second extended plays. And like maybe that's kind of the pathway to Baltimore. But at most angles I see this playing out, it's just like Buffalo they were 4% passing above expectation last week. Like they're giving the ball to Josh Allen. he's cooking. There's nothing you can do right now to kind of slow him down. And there's nothing I think the Ravens can do defensively to slow him down. Like there's no matchup angle that has me like, oh, the Ravens are going to stop them. And I don't think the market's like caught up to the fact that the Bills are far and away the best team in the league right now.
Yeah, when you talk about Josh Allen, you always think about him like stiff arming a defensive end and getting the ball off. But a big part of what makes Josh Allen so good is that when he's in that clean, ideal situation, the Bills have been elite, right? And he's going through his progressions. He's getting to the open receiver. He's making the right read. He's making a good throw. When they have a clean pocket, the Bills are averaging 9.3 yards per dropback. That's second highest in the league behind Minnesota through 3 weeks. And an underrated part of the Ravens this year is, in talking about their defense, is I think the loss of Mike McDonald really hurt in terms of generating pass rush specifically, because it's not an overly talented defensive front. They've got some good players, Odafe Owe, Nnamdi Madubuike now. But if you look through the first 3 weeks, they have a 27% pressure rate. That's fourth lowest in the NFL. And Mike McDonald was creating favorable situations for those guys through what they were doing schematically, through the sim pressure stuff, through dropping guys from the line of scrimmage, bringing slot, bringing linebackers from depth. It hasn't looked quite the same so far this year. And if you're giving Allen time to sit in the pocket and read things out, he's really good at that. And he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league at that. So I think that's concerning for Baltimore, the Baltimore defense on that side of the ball.
Yeah. I would just add to that of like, I don't know if this is a function of like scheme, Josh Allen's like processing ability, a combination of all of those things, or even the matchups, though I don't think this matchup is any different than the ones that it's obviously different, but I don't think it's like so markedly different than the ones they've played that it's going to kind of put this data point that I'm about to say. But Josh Allen's disruption rate, I talk about this disruption, and I think it's like very revealing of quarterbacks and like situations. And again, disruption is like, it can be two things: either perfect coverage, defined as plays where no player kind of messes up. We track every player of every game. We can kind of see when someone gets a negative coverage grade. That's defined as them messing up. Coverage is a weak link system. You just need one guy to mess up, and the entire play can kind of be nuked on the defensive side. So disruption is either perfect coverage or what I call disruption pressures, which are the types of pressures that force a quarterback out of his progression. And if you look at the data, a lot of that actual number is a function of like obviously some kind of schematic elements, but also a quarterback's ability to process. And you see guys with like huge gaps that play for the same team in the same year, but are kind of struggling to like understand when pressure is coming such that they can kind of deviate from the play, et cetera, et cetera. Josh Allen's rate in 2023 and 2022 was 40% disruption. It's generally a pretty stable metric. It's at 25% now. Now, part of that could be like, and that's a massive, massive gap. The average disruption play is like 0.6 expected points added. Non-disruption play, is 0.6 points added, and a disrupted play is negative 0.6 points added. So like that 15% gap, 17% gap is huge. Now, like it's probably going to regress somewhat, and obviously, like Josh Allen can't sustain this good a play, but he's been so far and away better than anyone else. But there's also like, is it possible we need to have a Joe Brady conversation? And like, I was certainly the one being like, Joe Brady, you got to throw the ball more. But like, this is a massive, massive difference. And I think that like whatever they're doing, or if it's just Josh Allen being an alien, like there's something different about how this offense is basically staying in structure, meaning having these plays that are disrupted less often. And that to me is like that number just popped at me. And you can kind of, I think, explain a lot of the production difference just by virtue of like how many of these plays are in structure, especially when you understand the base rates of like the difference of like a full point, whether the play is disrupted or not. But I don't know. Is it time to talk about Joe Brady?
Yeah, our colleague Seth Galina was talking about it a little bit on the quarterback recap show this week. Brady does a really good job of game planning for specific matchups. And you saw that against Jacksonville. They came out and they just ran their man beaters and they worked, right? So I'm high on this offense moving forward. Just to recap this side of the ball, or close out this side of the ball, and then we can flip over to Ravens offense. If I like the Bills passing offense here, which I do, I was kind of going through. I'm like, who do I like receiver wise? It's a struggle. You've got Ty Johnson catching 30-yard touchdowns. You've got Keon Coleman catching 30-yard touchdowns. It's like, okay, who's it going to be? I think their top receiver in terms of just production and targets and stuff is Khalil Shakir. And I think that also lines up with where you want to attack Baltimore. Their linebackers have allowed more yards than any unit in the NFL. They're top 10 in slot production allowed. That's kind of where Shakir lives. In theory, it's a good Kincaid spot too, but Dawson Knox ran more routes than Dalton Kincaid last week, so I'm staying away. It'll probably
Kincaid left with an injury for a little bit.
Yeah, that's part of it.
But also he's probably banged up.
Yeah, but I'll be on Shakir in terms of that. Flipping over to Baltimore, we talked about it with Dallas. Baltimore ran the ball down their throats last week. 71% of their plays were designed runs. That was tied for the highest in any game this year with the Malik Willis Packers game that I was very wrong on and thinking the Colts would roll there. And there wasn't really any reason to stop. They averaged over 6 yards per carry. And a big part of that was the read option stuff with Lamar and Derrick Henry. And that puts so much stress on a defense just because of the singular talents that both of those guys are, especially when you factor in that the Ravens are one of these teams that gets Lamar, typically read option. It's running back inside path, quarterback outside path, and you're reading. The Ravens are one of these teams that will flip it, and Lamar is great kind of getting downhill on that inside path on the read option. And the Bills, good defense, but they're set up structurally to defend the pass. So 58% of their snaps have 6 or fewer defenders in the box. That's 6th highest in the NFL. They're 3rd highest in percentage of snaps with 2 high safeties. And as a result, they're bottom 10 in EPA per run allowed, which makes sense unless you have J.J. Watt on your interior defensive line or something, right? You can just single-handedly wreck things, which they don't. They have some good players up there, but they don't. So I imagine Baltimore might follow a pretty similar strategy on this side of the ball. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is the pathway to success is they rely on the ground game. But we talked about this, so the Chiefs a couple of times where the fragility of that strategy is, right, you have a bunch of success or marching, one drive at a time, one first down at a time. And at some point you get a holding or just you need to rely on 8 of these plays to go your way in a row or go 8 out of 10. Whereas if you're a much more explosive offense, you can go 1 for 4. But if that one goes for enough yardage, then it kind of makes up for it. And that's pretty fragile when you play against a Bills offense that seems like they're scoring at will right now. And you could just find yourself down 14-3, in which case you're in the worst case scenario of you need to kind of pass rushers are going to dig their cleats in knowing they're going to rush the passer. Baltimore struggles in protection, and you kind of have to go away from that ground game where the game script really matters. And it's not as if you're going up against a non-explosive offense. So that's the path of just okay, if you can get that opening drive touchdown, let's say, you get a stop on Buffalo, and then you can sort of get into this game script. And I think the game plays out very differently. It's just very fragile. And I think kind of more needs to go right for Baltimore to get into that game script than vice versa.
Yeah. I'm probably just going to sit back and enjoy this game in terms of betting on a side. I don't have a strong read, but just to recap, I will be betting Khalil Shakir receiving overs, likely, depending on the line. Haven't seen it, but likely. And then Lamar rushing overs, just because you get to design stuff, you get to scramble stuff if they're behind. And there's not really any data behind this, so I could be completely wrong, but I just feel like in big games, that's when you want to take quarterback rushing overs because they're just I need it. I'm going to go get it. And this is a big game. It's not a divisional game, but the Ravens are 1-2. The Bills are one of the teams that they're theoretically going to be competing with at the top of the AFC for seeding. So I like Lamar rushing overs in this spot.
I would just add to that. What I particularly like about Lamar's rush shares in particular is that like it's game script agnostic, right? Like if they're leading, he's going to get design rushes. And if they're not, like he's going to scramble a bunch and he can pick up yardage that way. And that's very rare for a rushing prop, of course. To your earlier point about the Joe Brady doing a really good job, or I guess that's the point of Joe Brady doing a really great job of game planning for a specific opponent. I think Baltimore is going to be one of the biggest pass funnels in the NFL this year. They're number one in rush EPA, and going to be at the top at basically most metrics. I mean, Roquan Smith is certainly a big part of that. And I see the Bills kind of continuing on this path of like, if you look at a graph of their pass rate relative to expectation, it's just a linear curve up. And I see that continuing in this spot. And the market right now is pricing in. I got some alts up here. Josh Allen of like the low volume quarterback that we've seen from the last kind of like 12 games or so. But I don't think that's really the relevant sample because I do think they're going to be much pass heavier. And like, they're not going to beat teams 47-10 where Josh Allen has to stop throwing at halftime. That's been true the last 2 weeks. I just don't think that's a sustainable method, as good as they are. And obviously, like, still extremely high in the Bills. But that's probably, dare I say it, my favorite SGP of the week is going to be Josh Allen passing and the Bills alt spreads. I
was close last week. I was on the Bills heavy. I had alt spreads. I had Allen overs.
And all credit would have been to you because you talked me out of the Jaguars. I was on here like ready to go gung ho, and I listened back and I was like, Ben had the better arguments, 100%. So I thank you for that. I would have really thanked you if Josh Allen threw some more second half passes and scrambled a little bit less often on that last drive. But such is the game.
I'm sure we'll go back and forth on that. You had me with the Saints Cowboys game week 1. There's definitely going to be times where we're both on it. So, final game for our single game recaps. Then we'll hit some SGPs around the league, some key insights around the league. We got another Monday night doubleheader for you, fresh out of the oven. Seahawks Lions is the second game there. Detroit 3.5-point favorites. 46.5 point total in this game. The Seahawks won pretty convincingly over what is probably going to be a really bad Miami team without Tua at quarterback by the looks of it. So do you think 3.5 is too many? What angles are you looking at in this game?
Yeah. First off, I just got to say off the bat, I know this game's in Detroit, but make this game in Seattle, 10 o'clock, stagger the games. It's so obvious. I mean, come on.
I can't believe you're on that bandwagon as an East Coast guy. I can understand it from Pacific, but
look, football season, you got to eat, breathe, sleep football. As you can tell, I slept 2 hours on a plane last night. So maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm ahead of myself, and the late nights are catching up to me. But no, you just like, I want to watch as many football games with nothing else going on. To focus on. Either way, to answer your question, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty around each of these teams, right? I think for Seattle, it's a question of like they have played about as easy a quarterback slate as you could possibly have. It's like Bo Nixon in his first game. I mean, Skylar Thompson in game 3. It's obviously been a little bit of a cakewalk for this defense, but I think like, you don't want to punish teams for how good they've been, right? That doesn't say you should just like blindly trust the numbers, but I do think like it fits in a little bit with like what we expected, which is like the pressure rates. If you break it down into the subcomponents, right? It's not as if like the Broncos have like a disaster of an offensive line. The Patriots have a really bad offensive line. Like, fine. That's like, that makes sense. It's not as if Miami is, I mean, they're not great, but it's not a complete train wreck that you can kind of just chalk it up to like, oh, it's just a matchup. And like there are atop basically every metric, whether it's EPA, whether it's like a lot of the pressure stuff. I don't think that is like true in the sense of like, I'm willing to bet them to be number one, but I think it is certainly directionally accurate, right? Like I think that it is, it would be a little crazy to say like, this is not going to be a top defense barring any major injuries right now. And I think that matters against the Lions in particular, who like have such drastic splits, depending on like effectively if Jared Goff is like in scheme, however you want to define it, if you want to use like disruption or not. That's a quarterback who's been top 3 in every metric, PFF grade, EPA, whatever you want, yards per attempt, anything when he's not disrupted for the past 3 years. And this brings me to 2 points here. Number one, if the Seahawks can continue at this rate, they lead the NFL in pressure disruptions right now, that's going to matter a lot. If the sample of plays is 30% or 25%, whereas the ordinary percentage for the Lions is like 10%, that gap matters a lot in offensive production, even if it's like 15, 20%, all those percentage points matter. And the second piece to this is like, and I'm curious what you think here is, or if there's anything you notice schematically, like the Lions have not been as good in scheme. And we talked about this a bit last week. And like, even though they won that game, Goff did like, that was entirely on the run game. Goff did not, his numbers did not look much better. Even had a garbage pick 6 taken off the board. Like that was outrageous, by the way. Like the ball was so clearly
the 2-minute warning one.
The 2-minute warning one. The ball was so clearly snapped, but like that's not even the part that gets me there. And I had bets on both sides of this game. This wasn't like I was going for the Cardinals here. Is that like how many times have we seen a delay of game penalty or like end of quarter and the refs are just like waving their hands and making sure the play doesn't happen? And they didn't do that. Like it was unfathomable to me, and like it did not get a lot of attention. And like that was a huge play in the outcome of the season that got no attention. I'm going on for a while here. All I wanted to say is I think that the disruption that Seattle can pose to Detroit itself is a problem. And then even if not, I have kind of concerns with Detroit and this offensive scheme. And I'm like, I don't know what to balance. Is it like the sample that we've seen this year or the much larger from the past kind of 2-3 years?
Yeah, I'm not super worried about the Detroit scheme. Detroit has been interesting the first few weeks of the season because they have moved the ball consistently. They're 4th in offensive success rate. They've just made mistakes in high leverage situations. Goff has been not good. He's one of our lowest graded quarterbacks. He's top 10 in turnover worthy play rate. There's been at least one play per game where he just like doesn't see a guy over the middle of the field. Dennis Gardeck dropping into coverage and picking him off last week. There's been too many of those from Goff. They've gone into the red zone a lot. We talked about this last week. They haven't converted at a high rate. They're 26th in the NFL in red zone touchdown rate. 3-4 failed 4th down conversions. They had to play against Tampa where they didn't get the clock stop before half. So there's just been like things on the margins like that have really hurt the Detroit offense. But like taking a big picture view of it, they've still moved the ball effectively. They still have a great running game. And you would imagine Goff is going to step it up a little bit as the season progresses. To this point, I don't really know what to make of the Seahawks in this kind of matchup because we haven't seen them tested by an offense like this. I do have a lot of faith in Mike McDonald, and there's talent on this defense, right? You have some good players up front. You have a good secondary. Linebacker is probably a concern, especially if Jerome Baker is still out. But they've been able to scheme up pressure in the same ways that Baltimore did. And yes, they played a bad slate of opposing offenses through the first 3 weeks. But if you look at fewest yards allowed per dropback this season, they're first at 3.9, and then it's the Bills and Steelers at 4.5. That's what should be happening when you're playing these offenses. Like you should be first by a margin. If you're a good defense, they are. They're not 5th or whatever it is. And so they've been really good. But I still have a lot of faith in this Detroit offense. And I think the thing that concerns me in this matchup is some of the injuries along the defensive line for Seattle. Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, the first-round rookie out of Texas, both left last week's game with injuries. It sounds like it's kind of a day-to-day type deal. I haven't seen an injury report yet with this being a Monday Night Football game. We're recording on Wednesday. But if one or both of those guys misses, it hurts this defense with the way they want to play. Mike McDonald answered a question this week about defending the run with lighter boxes. And he's like, it puts more stress on the defensive line because you're playing gap and a half, or you don't have as many bodies down there. And when you have a Leonard Williams and a guy as talented as Byron Murphy, that works because they're good players. If you start to cycle those guys out, it can get ugly against a team with as good an offensive line as Detroit, with a two-headed monster out of the backfield like David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, no, I think it's also right to point out of like specific to this scheme, right? Like it is not universal that like you can just plug in or like take out, I guess, a defensive tackle of X caliber and it will kind of uniformly distribute amongst the teams, right? Like Leonard Williams' presence, because of how the Lions play defense, exactly as you're talking about, of like they're basically reliant schematically on a couple of guys to win. That is particular to the Seahawks team and matters a lot more. I think that's right. I would also just say, like on the other side of the ball, like Seattle has not done a great job kind of slowing down pressure. They've allowed the fourth highest rate of quick pressure, and like Marcus Davenport is out, and like Charles Cross right now is our number one graded tackle. I assume they'll see a lot of Aiden Hutchinson. I think a central question is like, how can the Lions secondary pass rusher? First off, who wins that matchup? Like, is it in a Cross versus Hutchinson? Like, can Cross slow down Hutchinson? And then like, who can kind of step up on the Detroit side of the ball? And will they be able to get pressure? And I think that's like kind of the pathway for Detroit to have success on defense, because I don't think it's the secondary slowing down the emerging Jackson Smith-Njigba, even if he had a little bit of a disappointing week last week. And we obviously saw Tyler Lockett get much more involved in a lot of those like zone routes of him finding the soft spot. And then DK Metcalf obviously has that kind of vertical presence. I mean, he can do a lot more, but not everyone can consistently catch 75-yard touchdowns like him.
Yeah, starting with the Hutchinson question, I don't think he'll see much across in this game. He typically plays right tackle side. Like they will move him around. He will, like week one against the Rams, their left tackle spot was a real question. Guys got injured, and the Lions put him over that left tackle spot. So I think it's a situation where they want to put him where you're weakest, and that's the right side of the Seahawks offensive line. Left tackle, you mentioned it. Charles Cross has been very good. He's, I believe, our highest graded left tackle through the first 3 weeks of the season. Left guard through right tackle, if you just isolate those four positions, they're like bottom 5 in pressure rate allowed. So you have Hutchinson working against Stone Forsythe, who is in theory their third string right tackle, because they had Abe Lucas. He hasn't come back yet. George Fant started the season. He's on IR now. So you're down to your third string right tackle against Aiden Hutchinson. And we saw the second string right tackle against the Bucs, 4.5 sacks. So there definitely is potential to wreck the game there. But I think one of the things I've noticed with the Seahawks this year, and Ryan Grubb coming in as offensive coordinator, Geno's getting it out quicker, it's fun to watch Geno because he will stand in the pocket and get hit and still deliver it. And he wants to like wait till the last minute to read things out and let guys get open. But when the offensive line is in the shape it is in, you don't want him doing that often. So his average time to throw, if you look at the first 2 years of his career, it was closer to middle of the pack. This season, he's third fastest in the NFL in terms of average time to throw. And it's a lot of these stick spacing routes, just like 5 yards, turn around, get the ball. They run a lot of that, more than almost any team in the NFL. And then he's still one of the most accurate quarterbacks based on our ball charting data when he's going downfield. So as long as Hutchinson / the secondary pass rushers, which I don't have a ton of faith for Detroit and anyone outside of Hutchinson, as long as he doesn't wreck the game, I think this is a good spot for them against the Detroit pass defense, which is, as we've talked about, again, a pass funnel. They're good against the run, much worse against the pass. Yeah,
I was going to highlight a lot of what you mentioned. I mean, his time to throw is like 2.8 seconds, 2.7 seconds the previous 2 years, and then it's 2.5, which is very, very quick. That is like a massive kind of gap there. He's also scrambling like 3% less. It was 10% in his first 2 years. It's also amazing to see, like, if you just stack up the years, how like so many of these traits are like exactly the same year over year. But what has changed? His accuracy rate was like 45%. I define it a little bit differently based on the data that we have at PFF. It was like 45% in the previous 2 seasons. One was 46, and this year is like up to 55. And I think that's like a function of exactly what you're talking about. A lot of these kind of routes that they're using to get the ball out quick. And really what I think this comes down to, given that, is like, can Aiden Hutchinson win? First off, are they going to move him around the formation enough to avoid cross, which I assume they will, but it's never a given. And then, like, are they going to disrupt even those plays because they're generating pressure in 2.5 seconds? And you're not going to run the ball on Detroit, I don't think. So more questions than answers, but it's one both teams I think are really, really fascinating given the state of where we are.
Yeah, this is another one where I don't have a great read on side, so I'm going to stay away there. I think in terms of the Seattle offense, the receiver I think most in this matchup, looking into it a little bit, is JSN. I know he had the quiet game last week, but Detroit is a heavy man defense, and what they've really struggled with is what we chart as horizontal lead throws, which are basically anything that's working the receiver horizontally across the field, ins, outs, crossing routes, slants, whatever route it is that's doing that. They've allowed the third most passing yards on those throws specifically of any defense this year. And if you look at the top 5, it's a lot of man coverage defenses, which kind of checks out. Those are routes that are difficult for guys to carry across the field. And JSN has been the primary beneficiary of those types of throws so far this season for Seattle. So he has a bigger role in the offense. They're running more 11 personnel. They're getting 3 receivers on the field more. So I like him in this spot. And then kind of on the flip side, the Seattle running back rushing unders. I don't know if Kenneth Walker is going to be back. I don't know what those are going to be, but I think in general, the Seahawks are going to, 1, struggle to run the ball, and 2, probably not run the ball that much in this matchup.
Yeah, no, I think that you can't run in Detroit. I got one question before we move on from this game and go to the key insights and SGPs. Why is Grubb not running any play action? This is a team that's like 15% dead last. I would have assumed like this would be a high play. Do you think it's like a function of them just like really drilling in this like time to throw and like not trusting the pass protection to hold up? I would think like that's exactly what you need to do. Like when you are going to take your deep shots, you like basically have to have play action to buy time. This was just kind of in the course of doing my research this week, like one of the more puzzling stats. I don't know if it's
they're not. So they're low play action, low screen, low RPO. They're an offense that is going to, let's say, Geno drop back, make the right read, get the ball out. And I think there's kind of 2 ways. If you're concerned about the offensive line, 1, you can go heavy, go play action heavy, like the Saints are doing, or like they have done the first few weeks of the season. That's one way of doing it. I think what the Seahawks and Grubb are saying is they're one of the biggest empty teams in the NFL. And so you're just getting Geno back there in shotgun. You've got 5 receivers, and he's good at reading things out and knowing where to get the ball. So I think they're basically saying, get the ball out quick. We've got 5 receivers out in routes. You're going to have quick options, make the right decision, make an accurate throw. And it hasn't not worked through the first couple weeks of the season. So
yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And I guess just to give a betting angle to look out for is like attempts and yards are going to have and completions. I think they're going to have a very different relationship with Geno Smith than other quarterbacks. But I think that's particularly interesting.
Let's do some SGPs first. What do you got this week outside of the ones that you hit on already?
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little bit of a broken record here, but I'll keep going back to it, and that's betting on New Orleans. I think there's a very compelling case for Derek Carr, all passing, the Saints to win with margin, and then I'd be fine with either of Olave and Shaheed. I posted a graph on wide receiver play, and Chris Olave is just like so far and away better through 3 weeks in his separation and post throw grade. it is revealing, and he's been awesome since his rookie season a couple of years ago. So no shock there, I think, and the production will come. But this is an Atlanta team that cannot generate pressure right now. It's possible that they were kind of playing contain because they've played a bunch of quarterbacks who can beat them with their legs in the first couple of weeks of the season. But I think it's a function of just like, this is a team that struggled last year generating pressure. They added Matthew Judon, but like it hasn't been enough, and he hasn't been particularly great yet. And I think that the market is certainly implying right now of like, oh, this is a team that lost their a couple pieces on the interior line, and that matters, of course. And Alvin Kamara is also banged up right now. But all of that to me is just like have kind of tilt New Orleans a little bit pass heavier. And I don't think that Atlanta is going to be able to generate enough pass rush. And Derek Carr has some serious drastic splits, and like that's relatively stable given the type of quarterback that he is, not particularly mobile guy. And also like we have a pretty large data set of plays Derek Carr's been. He's the number 2 quarterback right now in expected points added when he's not quick pressured, and then is 4th worst when he is quick pressured. So I think that is a directional split to keep in mind. And I don't think that Atlanta is going to do much to be able to stop them. I think that they're going to pass a little bit more this week, or at least that's a tails spot to bet on. And they can certainly win over the top, even though Atlanta has done a good job so far preventing explosive plays. Not everyone can, be Rashid Shaheed and win no matter what. Guy dropped a touchdown last week. Didn't bet on him, but he had it. A little disappointing for our king Shaheed.
No one's Rashid Shaheed. There's only one.
That's right. There is only one Rashid Shaheed. The other one I'll go to worked for us a couple of weeks ago, and I think is a good spot again, and that's Gardner Minshew passing and Las Vegas to win. Right now, Las Vegas cannot run the ball. I thought like last week would be a decent spot to bet on them against a Panthers team, and like sure the game script got away from them, but I think part of that had to do with the fact that they were running so early and often on early downs. And I think that especially if Myles Garrett doesn't go, and he's listed with 3 separate injuries right now on the injury report. He was carted off last week. I don't think this is just like your typical like little nicks and bruises that you accumulate over the course of the season. The market is still pricing in these passing yards as very, very low, and like this Cleveland defense is being a unit to fear. But the secondary has been atrocious outside of Denzel Ward. Coverage is obviously a weak link system. The Raiders have so many ways to beat you. Even my guy Trey Tucker, leading the team in receiving yards last year, he's a threat on deep bombs. They've got Jacoby Myers. They've got Brock Bowers. Devontae Adams did nothing last week. He's obviously a great weapon, and they can kind of exploit these weak links in the Browns secondary. If Las Vegas is going to win, I think that is a game script of Las Vegas passing a bunch and kind of taking advantage of a defense that I think is perceived to be a little bit stronger than they actually are.
It's a Trey Tucker reception under yards over spot.
See, here's the thing. They give Trey Tucker these screens. That kind of concerns me.
Yeah, that
where like they'll like his average depth of target will just be like both sides here. Like guy's not getting any targets like 5 to 10 yards down the field, but it's getting the 25 yarders and the little screens. And I guess the last one I got. I don't think you can go wrong playing either side of this Washington-Arizona game. I think that like the total is high right now, but I think these are maybe the 2 worst defenses in the NFL. I mean, the Rams, or at least pass defenses in the NFL. The Rams probably up there also. And these guys are looking to chuck the ball downfield. We've seen kind of these bad defenses. It's in a dome also for what that's worth, which is probably nothing. But it's just a visual I can't get out of my head right now of like both quarterbacks are looking to throw the ball downfield. They both have had success. I think there is a kind of tendency, at least in the market's pricing, of like these are teams that do run the ball a lot, but in a particular game script, especially if they're generating a bunch of explosive plays, I think that can kind of skew a little bit pass heavy, and is a spot I'd be looking to attack on both sides.
Yeah, I'm for one happy that the Terry McLaurin seal got broken. on Monday night, and they finally hit him downfield a few times. That was extremely frustrating the first few weeks of the season because that's something that,
Jaden Daniels missed a wide open Terry McLaurin in the first quarter, and I was like, that was the deep ball we were getting, and he missed it, but obviously made up for it.
And that's something that Daniels did really well at LSU, and you just didn't see it the first few weeks of the season. So promising for him. I'll stick in, moving over to the key insights, I'll stick in that Washington-Arizona game for my first one. Line's probably going to be low, but James Conner is third among running backs in receiving grade for us this year. Like he's not a flashy receiver. He's not a big play threat necessarily. But Washington's defense ranks 31st in running back target rate faced. And if you look at their defense schematically, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Bobby Wagner is not the same player at this stage of his career. He doesn't have the same kind of range. He's better kind of in tight spaces against the run specifically. Frankie Luvu's more of a downhill player at linebacker too, a run defender, a blitz threat. So if you're getting those guys on Conner out of the backfield, and we think Arizona passes a little bit more, I think this is a pretty good spot for him to get a few catches and go over that receiving yard total, which I haven't seen yet, but would imagine it's fairly low. The other one I have, the Broncos defense has been quietly like pretty good early in the season. I know a lot of the focus was on how bad the offense was the first few weeks, but they kind of suffocated Tampa Bay. But I'm going to hope that drives down Rodgers' line this week. And I think given what we've seen from Rodgers throughout his career and his ability to beat the blitz, something that Denver is doing a ton, I think it's a good spot to go Aaron Rodgers yardage over. He's fifth in passing grade against the blitz this season. Broncos are first in pass blitz rate. So those are the two key insights that I've got for this week.
Love it. So I guess we got some requests to recap everything we kind of talk about. So I'll try and cover some of the SGP stuff. Just quick hitters, obviously did the analysis before. We got Daniel Jones passing, Giants alt spreads, Devin Singletary rush, Dallas alts, Bucky Irving rush, and Eagles / Bucks alts. Allen passing alts with Buffalo, definitely my favorite spot of the week. Got Carr in the passing game there, Minshew, and then a Washington, Arizona shootout as well.
Yeah, and for me, Dallas minus 5.5, under 45.5. Don't even hate parlaying those. Jones rushing over is just because I think it can hit kind of anyway in that game. Really like Tampa Bay plus 2.5 or money line. As we've been talking, I see the line is now 1.5. And I'm guessing it's going to continue moving. So I like that, though. I like Bucky Irving rushing overs as well. In Baltimore, Buffalo, Shakir receiving overs, Lamar rushing overs. And then Seattle, Detroit, I like JSN overs and Seattle running back rushing unders dependent on the lines.
Beautiful. I just got to add one more because I just saw the lines posted. I think Trevor Lawrence's alts are badly mispriced against a Jaguars team, against a Houston team that is easier to pass against and believes some explosive plays. It was ugly. It was ugly Monday night, but no time to get back on the train.
I like that. We talked about the explosive plays for them last week against Minnesota, and you saw the Vikings hit on a few.
Yeah, I assume that, look, we got to bet on numbers as well, and that's certainly one that stood out to me. But we got a full slate.